All right, everyone. It is Friday, and you know what that means. It's time for the Manufacturing E-commerce Success Show. I am one of your hosts, Damon Pistolka, and I am so excited for our guest today. I am going to turn this show over to my friend over there, Kurt Anderson, co-host, to take this off and introduce our guest for the day.
Damon, happy Friday, dude. What a magnificent week it's been. It's fall, sports, all sorts of exciting things going on. But man, today we have a legendary guest here, Don Schmincke. And Don, happy Friday. Thank you for joining us. How are you today?
Oh, great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Don, we have so much to cover. So yeah, guys, Whitney's here today. So if you're out there, please drop us a note, give a hello. You absolutely want to connect here. This is such a dynamic program that we're going to cover. So Don, if I read your entire resume and I'd be here all day, but MIT, John Hopkins, you've written multiple books. We have the Code of the Executive, High altitude leadership. You have coached, trained, and helped lead over 30,000 CEOs. So my first question for you today, Don, is, as a young man growing up, I would say a young boy growing up, who was your hero growing up? Who on earth paved the path for this researcher to go like all in on leadership and entrepreneurship? Who was your hero as a little boy growing up?
That's a good question. I was kind of geeky as a little boy. It probably would have been like Neil Armstrong or one of the astronauts. And I remember tracing flight paths around my globe at home to see where everything was before they, launched. But I don't know. It's a good question. There were a number of people that influenced me, but but then I almost dropped out of high school, so I'm probably not a good example to ask that question.
Almost dropped out of that. So the guy that went, Damon, I don't know if Don realizes, he really, somebody from MIT and John Hopkins, really shouldn't be on this program, But Don, was there a coach, family member, teacher? Was there somebody that really kind of paved the path that, for you to go to undergrad and the education route that you took, there had to have been somebody in your path that really inspired you. Anybody that you want to share?
Well, the police, actually.
Good answer, man. So Sergeant Cooper, back in whatever year it was, thank goodness that he pulled you off the streets and got you on the right path. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah, well, they said, you have to show up for your senior year, or you got to repeat it. And I was like, hey, there's no way I'm repeating this senior year. So it was like, so what I got to do? They said, well, you got to finish the whole year in 2 months. So the teachers were great, and I did, and so I got out of there. And then I was working at my uncle's gas station, and I noticed I was in rock bands. I mean, I was not a good role model. And I ended up noticing all the guys with the fancy cars had an education. Thought, I better get an education. So I went to a community college up the street.
Right.
And at that point, they didn't care whether I showed up or not. I mean, they had my money. So I started feeling accountable. But it was interesting. There were a couple people there that were retired from Cambridge. And one guy was an MIT professor. Another woman, she went to BU, her husband went to MIT. I don't know what MIT was. It was like a trade school. I mean, what is this? And they said, I must have been getting good grades or something. They said, you should apply because you're involved with all these different things. So I applied and I got in, so now I'm next thing I know, I'm in Cambridge. And then things just took off. They were so supportive because I could go into any area of research or learning. And I did. I mean, I bounced around at the early stages of AI. I had to work my way through school, and I ended up working on the Trident nuclear missile guidance system program over at Draper Labs. Automated the Harvard MIT biomedical lab. Majored in planetary physics. It was very disjointed. I have ADHD, so it explains a lot. And so I could connect all the dots and all these things in my head. Right. So it was really good. And that's when I started studying humans and how they start grouping. And I got really fascinated with that. And that's what took me to Johns Hopkins. And then Kathy Trower, before she went over to and took over one of the Harvard projects, she got me to start teaching there, and that's how I started happening. So I started hanging out with a lot of executives in the MBA programs, right? And they started complaining about, the failure rate of management theories. And they said, could this be biological? And I'm thinking, well, that's a great idea. So no one had ever asked this question before,
Yeah.
right? So I started hanging out with anthropologists and evolutionary geneticists, and we started discovering why management theory fails, and created a whole new set of models that we started applying in companies. And next thing I know, I'm training 30,000 CEOs. So that's sort of the short story.
That's the short story. All right. Well, hey, thank you.
I like that though.
Yeah.
He just is just like, next thing you know, I'm training 30,000 CEOs.
Yeah. No big deal. Just I'm in a rock band 1 minute. Next thing you know, I'm helping 30,000 CEOs. So Don, appreciate your modesty, your humility. Again, give a shout out to everybody here. Hey, Tom Herman's here today. Hey, Tom, happy Friday. Adam, our buddy Adam Baker. We got Whitney. Whitney says the police. You mean the rock band? So hey, might have been. So again, guys, bring your questions, drop your comments. You absolutely want to do yourself a favor, connect with Don here on LinkedIn. So Don, okay, so you community college, and you very modestly, you end up at MIT, go to Johns Hopkins, and you deem yourself, you're the rogue scientist and explorer on accelerating leadership performance. So take us a little bit deeper. So I understand, you're like, hey, I started studying human behavior. The MBA folks are kind of complaining. So you're like, hey, we might be onto something, but walk us, it's one thing to go from an idea, a bunch of guys hanging out at the bar or, wherever you were. How did you take that conversation and turn it into this illustrious career? Walk us through that.
Yeah, when I started teaching at Hopkins in the graduate school, I got access to a lot of really different resources. So I was really privileged to just hang out with some brilliant minds. And we started toying around with some of these ideas. And then I thought, well, let's test this out. So I started doing expeditions to different parts of the world to see how humans organize and study collapses and failures. I was interested in doing autopsies. So I spent a lot of time looking at dead companies or civilizations declining. I snuck into the Soviet Bloc when it collapsed, which is kind of weird. But I learned a lot, by being inside of that. And so I've done a number of expeditions, and high altitude leadership came out of the NBC project with Chris Warner, my co-author, on mountaineering, studying humans in death zone environments. But more specifically, it sort of emerged when I began doing ancient research. So Oxford gave me permission to use an ancient manuscript that had been developing for 700 years. And it got documented about 500 years ago and then translated. And they had the manuscript. And they asked me I asked them, could I use this? And so they gave me copyright permission. And that's when I published the Code of the Executive, because they were training samurai managers how to lead. So, so here I am doing formal academic teaching, but then I'm branching off into these weird areas, and I start discovering things that I could correlate with some of the neurological brain science at Hopkins and the medical school there. And it just sort of took off. And then, I had some CEOs that were crazy enough to let me experiment with their companies, and then their sales would go up 2 or 3 times.
Right.
And I said, is that important? And they were like, yeah. That's so it's okay.
Is that a big deal? Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Get a 2-time. So, all right, Don, you have some amazing stories. You have some great adventures. You mentioned the Soviet Bloc, Vietnam. I know we're going to talk about Korea in a second, but before I'm going to go off script here. You mentioned ancient folks. So one of your topics is what is the Viking leadership secret for driving focused achievement? What is the Viking leadership secret for driving focused achievement? Curious minds want to know what's the Viking secret, man?
Well, I think when I started looking at early leadership, and I thought, okay, let's go back 10,000 years just to start. And, so somehow somebody got a bunch of people to leave their villages in Africa and go north, east, and west. Now, how do you do that? It's we're going to go to these new lands. We have no idea where we're going, but we're going to figure something out. And I noticed that the leadership style then was based on like the gods, or some magical forces of nature. And so the History Channel actually did a really great series called The Vikings. I don't know if you saw that or not.
Yeah.
And incredible. They had they anthropologically and archaeologically replicated one of these tribal migrations on the Vikings. And so you got to see how they were using that. Well, the thing that we came up with is we started seeing failure. We saw a lot of bankrupt companies that had died, but they had great mission statements, great visions, great purpose statements, great why statements, but they were dead. And I was curious, like, why did they die? They did everything right in creating these statements. And that's when I realized, like, oh, those statements are nice and motivational. I get it, but they're not what was driving us to migrate, to evolve as a species. Something else was needed. And that's where I used the Vikings as an exploratory tool, and I actually went over and started checking out Viking migrations, like in the northern UK, as an example. And what we found is that, for you to get your people to leave a safe village, to get on that boat for the dark waters, and it's not like it's hey, we're going on a fun cruise, and it's like, hey, we don't know where we're going, but and a lot of us are probably going to die.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what are you going to do? Hang motivational posters on the ship?
They didn't have like the all-you-can-eat buffet and like the pool. They didn't have those things back then. Apparently,
water slide.
Do this, right? And that's what we came up with. They were using some sort of winning saga, some sort of compelling saga, and that's different than a mission statement. That's different than a why statement or a purpose or a vision. It's just, and we began crafting this in companies, and it was amazing the impact. It was like we had to create a belief, which is what leaders should do. That's your job, is to create beliefs on something ahead that's so formidable that people believe they need each other to achieve it, and they're willing to suffer and sacrifice for it. So that's different than a mission statement. And that ended up being just a breakthrough for us, because we go into these companies and we could accelerate them faster or turn them around once we were able to create a saga.
Okay. Don, on the show, we have these things called the moment of silence, where like somebody just drops like this massive just bombshell, and you just did that. So we're just going to, it's lunchtime here and on the eastern part of the country. So we're going to savor that for a second. So Don, can you take us a step further? So how powerful, Whitney just said mic drop right there, right?
Yeah.
So Don, this is such a powerful thing. So again, like you think about, the mission statement, the war cry, the fighting for a cause, right? That's what you're describing. So like, we need each other. Can you take it a step further? Like, as you're describing companies that failed, immediately I'm thinking like Kodak, Blockbuster, Circuit City. Like, what were some of the companies that you were studying at the time, or what were some of those deaths those postmortems that you were diagnosing?
Yeah, I mean, they're on the list, and I think I was looking at like, why were companies stumbling, and some that might have had great passionate beliefs before, like IBM, or you look at and some are trying to come back, like Toys R Us as an example.
Yeah.
So but what was stopping it? What diverted it? And it turned out that there wasn't a saga. There wasn't people willing to suffer and sacrifice. It sounds so politically incorrect. Oh, we should have happy employees, and we should have build some self-esteem and get around. It's like no. It's when you create a saga, people are going to rally around that and be willing to lock arms with you to go into battle. And you look at the stories of some of these companies, like these entrepreneurial firms that, and in fact, this new book I'm doing is letting me get into some of this research.
Yeah.
A lot of these successful entrepreneurs didn't execute flawless plans. They are at the end of a history of failure, history of losing, history of making mistakes. And it was those moments of losing that made them stronger, because they learned something. And that's what I think we should be teaching, how to lose powerfully. And so when you see when you see that, it's like, it opens up a whole new realm of leadership that we don't teach. And the saga came out of that. So when we looked at what was missing, they had some really great motivational statements and all that, but none of it made strategic sense. In other words, We think, well, we need a rallying cry. We need to do this. We need to have a good why statement. That's great. You do. However, if it's not strategically indexed, you're just going to have a bunch of happy employees that end up in a dead company. So we back up and say, what is your strategy for winning before you even make the story, before you create a saga? What's your strategy for winning? And this is where we started going into strategic planning research. And there was a lot of data out there on the failure rates of strategic planning. So of course, as a scientist geek, I'm like, oh, this is cool. Let's find out what's going on here. And after so many years of researching this, we finally concluded that most strategic plans aren't strategic. So they're tactical. So we become confused. We're teaching tactical planning as strategy, and it's not.
Yeah. Again.
Okay.
Another mic drop
All right, guys. If you're just joining us, we're here with Don Schmincke. Boy, and Don has, if you're just getting a little taste of this, he has helped coach over 30,000 CEOs. He's the rogue scientist that is just really powerfully helping entrepreneurs. He has a new book coming out. You want to grab High Altitude Leadership. Don, a couple of things that folks say about you: the most provocative speaker in industry. Damon, I have a couple. Don, sit back for a second. Let's talk about Don for a minute here. Listen to, if you have time to work with a genius, take it. That's something that somebody said about Don. Profound effect on our entire group. Best speaker I have ever heard. The most revolutionary and transforming event in my entire career. That was somebody that attended one of Don's events. Unconventional style changed how we work. I could go on and on. Best speech ever. 1 in a million. Anyway, Don, so you're a dynamo. Let's talk about your new book. I want to take another step further.
I'm going to hang out with you guys more. You just you really bumped me up here. I'm getting feeling good about myself all of a sudden.
Oh my God, are you kidding? I'm like, man, Damon, we should be paying him for this. So
I'm going to tell you, Don, one of my friends, Chuck Cox, had heard you speak earlier this year or late last year. I can't remember. He said, you got to meet this guy. You got to meet this guy. And it was after we had talked before. And I was like, yeah, I know. Right. That's what I just said. So it is like that when people talk to you, man. And you're a gift. You're a gift. I love to spend the time with you.
Okay, let's take it another step further. So again, guys, we have the researcher converted into this just amazing leadership guru expert. So Don, when you're like, hey, I'm kind of onto this leadership thing, and like, hey, maybe I'll get a career out of this, right, Damon? Like, hey, maybe this thing's gonna work, right? So Don, as you're digging into this, like, to give us some examples, like a tactic, versus a strategy. We're like, together as a group, and let's say like, hey, we're on that corporate board at Kodak, or we're working at Blockbuster. We're like, man, these are great strategies, when indeed they were tactics and we were just completely confused. Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, I went to, like I said, I've been just really grateful to all these brilliant people that have helped me and let me learn some things. And I thought, well, if we're going to look at the strategic planning failure rates, let's go to the company that started strategic planning, the military.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right. I mean, they invented the whole word. So I was fortunate that my book on the samurai was making the rounds of the Pentagon. So I got invited to tour military operations with the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs. And of course, I'm milking everything I can out of these guys' heads because I'm trying to find out what's going on. And it was interesting. It was there was a quote, and I forget the general, but it was like, hey, you could execute tactically very well, just incredibly so. But if your strategy is flawed, you're going to lose the war. On the other hand, if you have a great strategy, you can make any number of tactical errors and still win. You see. And then, later on, I met with different people. I started working with Black Hawk Down, Matt Eversman, and I learned a lot of this from the ability to adapt and execute. But the strategic question came up that most of us have tactics because we're only looking like 1 year out. And Henry Mintzberg at McGill, I love using his work. He's brilliant. He said, strategy is a pattern of thinking. And what I'm adding to that is about winning. It's a thinking about winning. What does winning mean? And a lot of companies don't have that documented anywhere in their strategic plan. And then how are we going to do it is another way. And most of strategic plans are analytical. And that's why they become tactical. Because what we found out I noticed that when I got into this, there were these small startup companies, eh, all the thought leaders said they're not going to make it. All the management consultants say, yeah, they're doing it wrong. All the industry experts say, they're not going to be a problem. They're going to fail. And somehow these small companies end up rising up and dominating their industry. And I'm like, has anybody asked a question about this? Like, how did this company that everyone said was wrong, all the industry experts and consultants and thought leaders said they're not going to make it, end up dominating the world? So I went to look at that, like, Southwest, Amazon, right? I mean, like everybody was saying these guys aren't going to make it.
Netflix.
Turns out they were using strategy, which had nothing to do with tactics. You get to that later. But strategic advantage comes from intuition, comes from shifting your beliefs about what winning means and how are you going to do it. And what they were believing was something different that everyone else couldn't figure out because they weren't on the same belief system. So we went back through history and we saw, God, some of the greatest wars were won by outmaneuvering the beliefs of the enemy, the thoughts of the enemy. I mean, have you seen Patton, that old classic film, Patton?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Just a scene that's in the middle. And I thought, this is perfect. And I actually use this when we do our workshops with executive teams. And Patton's going up against Rommel in North Africa.
Yeah.
Rommel was the industry leader. He's the thought leader on tank battle strategy, right? So Patton's got to engage his troops. And he ends up engaging and winning. And he says something. I don't know if you remember what he said, but it was, Rommel, you magnificent bastard, I read your book. And I'm thinking, that was brilliant, because he doesn't mean I read your book so I know what and how do I do this better. He read the book because I want to know, what are you believing about tank battles? And you see this outmaneuvering in every successful battle and company. And yet what we end up teaching in our business schools is analytics. Well, we got to do a SWOT analysis. We got to do this analysis and market analysis. And I was doing the same thing. I was part of the problem. I was teaching this stuff analytically until I realized it was all bullshit. If the strategy is flawed, it doesn't matter how good your tactics are. What are you going to do to outmaneuver? And our ancestors, I found, nailed it. It's like there's 3 areas to change your beliefs. Where's the battlefield? Who's the enemy there, and how are you going to outmaneuver them? And when I open up a strategic plan in a company, I rarely see those questions answered, because sometimes you got to change the battlefield. Like Southwest wasn't competing against an airline. They all thought he was in the airline industry. No, he wasn't. He was out to crush Greyhound. He wanted to crush the bus company. I mean, he only needed an airport because they had that runway thing, because he needed a bus with wings on it, you see. Right. And it's just, and so when these things come out, all of a sudden, all the experts shut up, criticizing them, thinking, wow, how brilliant were they, like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, when you talk, if you guys just came in, so Don's talking about the saga, and Don, you really remind me, if like the Shackleton story. Do you know the Shackleton?
Yeah.
Right. And he put out that newspaper ad, and I don't remember. You guys, Damon, do you know that story?
No, I don't.
So Shackleton was going to do an exploration of the Antarctic, and it was like, starvation possible, might not return, low pay, something, but all these guys came out because he created the saga, where if you talk about hey, great pay, great this, who shows up? But because he created the saga, he created the cause, he had a, like you're saying, Don, the belief system, and they returned. It's a great, so if you look up Shackleton, it's a great story, but that's what remind me. So let's dig a little bit deeper into so Don has a new book. If you on your book list, holidays around the corner, stocking stuffer, whatever you believe in, grab Don's book. So Don, let's go a little bit deeper. So you're talking about how to win by understanding failure. Let's go a little bit further there.
Well, the new book's not out yet. The one for entrepreneurs on winning and losing. And we're still working that title. But what I think is interesting is that and people have always been saying this, that's the point. And we're just not listening, I think. I mean, who was it? Like Mandela says, "I never lose, I always learn."
I was,
You know, and it's like, and you see this through these great leaders, and yet we're not teaching how to lose. You know, we're not teaching like, what do you do with that?
Right.
But I think that once we're able to reorient our beliefs about it, we can learn. And the military was really good at this. They do these after action reviews on every event on AAR, right? And what are they doing? They're trying to learn, you know, even if it was successful or not successful, where could we be better? What happened? And but we don't teach orientation that way. George Stalk, actually, like I said, I'm really grateful to have access to some great minds, and he started the lean manufacturing revolution like 20 years ago. And so, you know, I spent a couple hours with George every few weeks to sort of share data, and I try to milk his brain for things. He's just brilliant to work with. We're thinking about doing a podcast with him, and he said something interesting about like his latest Harvard Business Review articles, like on the OODA loop. I don't know if you're familiar with that, OODA, and it stands for, you know, observe, orient, decide, and act. And it was a fighter pilot technique used by a few fighter pilots in the Korean War. And what they found out is that for some reason the U.S. jets were not at all superior to the new Russian MiGs. In fact, they were inferior in just about every measurement. Yet some pilots had a 10-to-1 kill ratio. And so how the heck do you get a 10-to-1 kill ratio using a substandard equipment? And they found it was from the way their minds are working. You know, they had a way of observing everything going on and then orienting, like, what does it mean? And that's I think what we should be teaching more of. And because when you look at losing and course correcting and adapting, a lot of it happens in that space. And if you do that well, then you can look at decision alternatives and which actions you want to take. But we kind of skip that part. You know, we observe something, roll right into, okay, let's make a decision and take some action. And we don't spend time in orienting. Like, what does this mean? How can we outmaneuver the enemy? How can we outmaneuver this problem? And that's what I want to promote more of in future teachings.
Right. Okay. So guys, I know we're coming to the top of the hour. If you're just joining us or if you have to leave, man, you absolutely want to connect with Don here on LinkedIn. But Don, I want to talk about, you know, so John Buglino's with us today, Damon. Somebody's going to go out and grab the High Altitude Leadership book. It's on their must-buy list right now. So Don, that's awesome. We're moving some books for you today. But I want to talk about, you study ancient tribes. Like, you really, you know, I don't like that cliche out of the box, but man, lack of vocabulary. You think so out of the box. You've studied all sorts of walks of life. You've traveled the world. Now, a couple of things I understand. You've been shot off an aircraft carrier. You were seen in a North Korea DMZ minefield with your kids, no less. We might have to dig into that for a second. You were almost arrested as a capitalist spy in the Soviet Bloc. So can you talk about like some of your travels or what's going on? Go to Don's website. You need to check out his website.
Yeah.
To get some stories. But Don, share some of these stories as you've traveled the globe to like really deep dive, understand human behavior to follow these leadership strategies.
That's me and my son. And that sign there says mine. So we're actually standing next to a mine.
Oh my goodness.
It's from my dad pictures. But, you know, I wanted, when my kids got old enough, I started dragging them on these excursions with me around the world. And I wanted them to see how beliefs alter leadership, but also, and how that impacts countries. Yeah. And, you know, you can look at different parts of the world, and just within just a few kilometers, they're totally different societies. It's nothing to do with the land. It's the same land, even same culture, if you will, has to do with leadership. And so when we were in Korea, we decided to go to the DMZ and look at that. And it was a stark contrast between the two countries. But that was part of, that's how we got the minefield shots.
That's awesome.
So can you share, like, I know like Vietnam or some of the, like, share some of the things that you discovered, or like how, share with us. And what I want to dig into is like, say like the crowd that Damon and I are targeting are like that 30-person, 50-person manufacturer. Maybe the founder is still working at it 30 years later. Maybe grandma and grandpa founded it, generations ago. It's third generation. But like for that smaller manufacturer that, maybe they've been doing things that the way they've been doing it for years. How do you help some of those smaller folks, or like, what are some of these applicable strategies that you've picked up, in Korea, in Soviet? How can we help like these small manufacturers get these competitive advantages? They're so, they're so deep in the trench and down the weeds. It's hard for them even lift their head up. What do you tell those folks?
Well, what it is, I don't really tell them anything. I ask.
Yeah, great. All right.
It's very Socratic. It's like if we do a strategic planning event, like we just don't go in and say, okay, we're going to go through and check the list and fill in the blanks. No, we actually spend time on the front end interviewing everybody separately to find out what their belief systems currently are and how they see reality. And then when we engage, we're able to design the questions around shifting what they're seeing as reality. And we like to use those themes I mentioned earlier, like, where's your battlefield? I mean, why do you think that's what it is? And why do you segment your markets the way you think you're segmenting? And what business are you really in? And these are interesting questions. And in fact, I was just coaching a CEO earlier, and they were in the bank data analytics business, and they were going bankrupt. They were in 5 million in revenue. They're losing $500,000 that year. And when we took them through this, it was like, well, we're not really in data analytics. We're into customer intimacy. And that was the big shift. And then they realized, who else wants customer intimacy? Like everybody, every industry. So they lost all their banking clients, but they went from 5 million near bankruptcy to over 25 million, highly profitable. It was just a belief shift. We did no SWOT analysis. We just changed, like, what's the field that you're on? And when you do that, you're able to open up new questions around, okay, who are the threats there, or the enemies there on that new field? And we found out that when we studied the autopsies, most of the deaths were from arrows in the back, not in the front. They weren't seeing the other threats coming out there. They were focusing on their rivals. Right. And that may be a threat, but a lot of times it wasn't. And so they couldn't shift. They couldn't. Like we had a home builder. Another example in Fort Myers, they were about 7 million in revenue, doing very well, but the whole industry was being stopped by China taking concrete out of the planet, and we couldn't get it. And their whole belief shift was around, geez, how do we fight China? They're stopping our growth. And in fact, I was doing the CEO's group the other day. And I remember he said, it was one of my VPs says, why don't we buy the ready mix plant? And I'm like, that's a stupid idea. We don't know that business. It's ridiculous. So after we bought the ready mix plant, guess who ended up having cement? I guess who did get it. And they went from 7 million in revenue. 2 years later, they're 70 million. 70. Yeah. So it's like we tell people, look, if you want to grow your company 3 to 10 times in the next few years, you're going to have to think strategically. Right. Forget about the SWOT analysis for now. You can get to that later. But how are you going to outmaneuver? Right? How are you going to outthink the enemy?
I love that. And you have a program, Why Strategic Planning Fails, and how why to ignore it and what to do about it. And you're kind of describing that here. So let's dig into that friendly fire. Okay. Do you find clients are, they're getting hit with that friendly fire, but just don't realize it? And next part of the question, when they do realize it, how do you fix it? How do you stop the friendly fire?
Well, when you say friendly fire, what do you mean? You mean
like when you were saying like a lot of the arrows, when you're describing like the arrows in their back, or like, that they're self, I took it that you're describing like self-inflicted wounds are a lot of the problems.
Actually, it's things like, geez, we didn't know it would be globalization. We thought it was our rival over here, or we didn't know our biggest enemy is our customer.
Yeah.
The freaking bargaining power is so high. And a lot of the stuff started with the Michael Porter research like 30 years ago, which is, so you build on that. It's like, wow, maybe maybe our biggest enemies are suppliers. They've got us, cranked. I mean, there's all these other things that could be threats to you, and maybe it's not your rival.
Right.
And that's what we found is interesting, is that when people get that, it changes strategy. How do we win?
Mm-hmm.
What do we let go of? Why are we fighting battles we shouldn't be fighting? That's another thing we don't teach in our business schools, is the art of withdrawal from battle. We get stuck into these battles and we don't think about withdrawing. It's like, wait a minute. So every time I'm in an audience of CEOs, it's like, there's some of you guys fighting battles you should be fighting. And then this one woman was like, oh my God, that just changed everything I'm going to do tomorrow.
Well, yeah, I mean, just that one thing, right? They could be going headlong down the road and they're like, this is just killing us, sucking all of our resources for this. And you look at the other 3/4 of their business could be going really well, and just say, okay, we're switching that. We're not worrying about that. That's a battle we don't want to win.
Right, right. So these are subtle belief shifts that for some companies are major and actually change their trajectory and their growth. And so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that level of art. And it really is art, because analysis is so seductive. And in fact, in the climbing book we did, High Altitude Leadership, we have a chapter on tool seduction, because when Chris was pulling dead bodies off of mountains, frozen, they were clutching their tools, and I said, geez, Chris, dead companies are also clutching their tools, and why is it so seductive? And I think it's because the human species, we strive for safety because we want to be safe, right? I mean, that's how we survive. And analysis lets us be safe because we can understand and control the world. And that's what we try to do. Let's analyze this so we can understand and control it. Control makes us safe. So we get really seduced by our tools. However, the people that are out maneuvering everybody are operating from a different level of altering beliefs, which is purely art. And there is no textbooks. There's no fill in the blank programs. There's no equations. There's no formulas. It's like art it's dangerous. It's uncomfortable. It's like, how do we create this? And that's what we try to teach. We try to teach art.
So when you have a small company that maybe say like the staff is on board, they're like, Don, we need your help desperately. Maybe the CEO just is a little bit resistant, or like, this is how we've always done it. How do you help folks? How do you convince them to buy into that new belief system?
Well, by being part of the journey, and I think every leader needs to think of it this way, you get them to buy in by leading them to it. Yeah. And you don't do it by telling them, hey, here's our new beliefs. No, that's put the poster on the wall and right. But it's having them discover these fundamental questions of
right.
What does winning mean? Why are we doing this? How do we do it? And you start uncovering the assumptions like, oh, we thought this was our battlefield, but no, it's over there. Or we thought this was enemy. No, it's over here. And it's in that artful look at the world that you begin to come up with more powerful strategies.
Right.
And so they're buying in because they're part of the journey with you.
Right. Right. So, all right. So let's go here. I'm going to be mindful of your time. I know you're a super busy man. So, this, I don't know, Don, if you're aware, this little thing was been going on the past couple of years called COVID, and kind of disrupted the supply chain, workforce, all that. What do you, and boy, you've been traveling for the past year, year and a half, you said, doing a lot. You do a ton of speaking engagements, again, promoting your book, promoting your helping 30,000 CEOs. Yeah. What tips and advice do you have folks, kind of surviving COVID, the supply chain, labor shortage, the quiet quitting? What are you kind of hearing word on the street right now?
Well, it's interesting. There was a lot of issue around remoteness, and so I get questions like, well, wait a minute, how do I put a saga in place and have them follow me when everybody's distributed and it's a remote? And I'm like, just follow what people have been doing for thousands of years. The massive armies of the world are distributed and there's still one army, or look at the churches or religious movement. They're distributed, but they're all, they're together. And that's where we start teaching about how to alter human grouping beyond being localized with each other. And it turns out that it's what we don't teach in our business schools around culture change programs, which leads to the high failure rate, is humans like to group. And if you trigger grouping instincts, you got an edge. And the best way to do that is, what are the tribe's symbols? What's the tribe's rituals? And what's the tribe's magic? There's magic moments in the mythologies. And when we go into companies and we start altering symbols and rituals and magic, everything starts coming together. So even these remote, COVID-based operations can still be as one, But also what we noticed is that we started studying dysfunction. And I'll do this in speeches. I'll say, what percentage of your business's time is spent in dysfunctional behavior, politics and, all that stuff going on. And it dropped during COVID because people weren't together. It went from 50% average to 30%. I thought that was fascinating.
Right.
So people are learning something about, maybe we should take this on, like when we come back together again, because I warn everybody that humans are coming back, that, that maybe we need to think for it. How do we organize our beliefs and align so we can execute faster? And that's the key. When you can execute faster, you have an edge.
Yeah.
Oh my God. All right. This is so good. All right. Let's well, we're gonna wind down. You have a new book that you're working on. It's we're discussing about power of, describe that again. The power of
how to lose powerfully. It's about winning and losing. Basically, the greatest winners know how to lose powerfully.
Yeah. Yep. So you mentioned before we got on that this new book is about entrepreneurship, and it's winning by studying losing, is what you said.
Yeah, we're sort of uncovering the mythology and just sort of exposing, let's say, what we're teaching that may not be accurate. So right. we're getting, and because we teach about successes, look what they did, and it's like, no, wait a minute, you're teaching planning. You should be teaching that no plan's going to work.
Yeah,
that's what you should be teaching. And what do you do? And then we use our Black Hawk Down insights from what we learned about that around, adaptation and, reorienting and speed of adaptation. I mean, we should be teaching that, not teaching that a plan's going to work. That's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Man, how'd you get so practical? And as a matter of fact, I think that was one of the other quotes. It was like, most practical advice that we've ever heard. And and again, guys, if you check out Don's website, you're going to see we're up 7x, we're up 70%, our such and such score went up, doubled and all these things. So Don, you just have a really profound effect. One thing I wanted to ask before we wind down, we're seeing a lot of layoffs at this time. Mm-hmm. So depending on where you're catching this or when you're listening to this, we're seeing, I think Meta, right, just had a big announcement this week.
Yeah.
What are you describing for companies, or what are you seeing? Where do you see things going from here, kind of overall? Any forecasting from the Don perspective?
You mean in terms of the future?
Yeah, just trends? Where are we at with the economy, and what do you see going on for coming into 2023?
I think it's going to be interesting because our supply chains have been rattled a lot. COVID,
mm-hmm.
and then you got the Ukraine war. I mean, the Ukraine war is an incredible look at leadership and the difference in leadership styles.
Yeah.
Right.
There's going to be some incredible movies and books around this that we're going to learn from, but they're seeing live what I'm teaching, and what's going on is thousands of years old. So it's not like I came up with a new idea, and I'm just looking at what's been working for thousands of years, and we see it playing out. But I think this, shaking up the world a little bit, will typically makes us stronger. And so I think it challenges us to question their assumptions, to look at maybe these beliefs got us here, but they're not going to get us to the future. Right. And what's a new way of seeing the world and the reality, and where we're going on the field of battle, and what's a real threat out there. And that's a very stimulating but also exciting question, because you get people together to think about that, and all of a sudden innovation starts happening,
Yes.
Your legacy beliefs. And it was interesting, George Stalk, I mentioned earlier, I was on a call with him, and he said, legacy companies, when they're under threat, respond with legacy strategies. And so that's a good question. Is your company using a legacy strategy?
Great question.
Okay. So for our small manufacturers out there, folks in the room here, guys, thank you, everybody joining us. This is just, man, what an event this was today. What a learning lesson. What a great opportunity, Don. Thank you for just sharing your brilliance and wisdom. Any last words of wisdom, advice, suggestions, that small entrepreneur, again, down in the trench, just grinding, trying to survive supply chain, trying to survive these labor shortages, just trying to make great products here, made in USA, to get them out there. What, any last parting thoughts or words of wisdom for those folks?
So many more mistakes to make and so little time left.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, use those mistakes as learnings. Just follow the greatest ones. They knew how to turn it around, and they learned from it. And yeah, don't be. I mean, you're going to feel bad at the time, but pick yourself up. Great samurai quote: like 7 times down, 8 times up. Keep getting up.
Keep getting up.
Keep getting up.
Man, drop the mic on that. Don, I could talk to you the other day. Southwest, what are a couple of your other stalwarts? What are a couple of your other just companies that you feel fit your perfect model of leadership success? Anybody else that you want to share?
Well, it's hard to say perfection because those great company lists change every 18 months.
Yeah,
Yes,
I know.
They do.
Who's fresh right now? Who's fresh in mind right now?
But I think what's happening is I'm interested to see where Amazon goes on this retail thing, and how we're going to start seeing our connections with each other in different ways. For instance, I don't know what's going to happen with Twitter. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, where is that going to end up?
Yeah.
And what happens if we have a Mars colony someday, which may happen pretty quickly, and what is that going to mean in terms of how we see ourselves and where we're going? What's happening with quantum computing? What happens with machines thinking at a point to where maybe they're outthinking us?
Right.
That could be scary. So there's things emerging that I'm paying attention to see what does this mean for us in the future. Some of the greatest companies haven't been born yet.
Many of the greatest companies are yet to be born. Absolutely. Guys, you got to go to Don's website, man. I like, this was just Don. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So much fun talking with
you. Don speaks to hundreds, thousands over his career. Don probably hundreds of millions. I don't know how many people you spoke to over the years, right?
Geez, yeah, tens of thousands.
And for you to share your time with us, what an absolute honor and privilege. This was just such a great learning opportunity. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Don. Did you see some of these comments? Tom says, what a fascinating conversation. Guys are thanking, so Don, thank you for joining us today, man.
Thanks for having me. I've had a ball with you guys. I get going for hours more. So your energy, I love I just love it. You guys are great.
Okay.
Awesome.
My last question, I promise. My last question. So Don, I kicked.
He's like Columbo, isn't he?
I kick things off. I kick things off with, who is your hero? Here's the last question that we have for you. Today, 2022, talk about your boys, taking them to Korea. You've been all over the world, all over the country. A lot of things are changing, shifting. Moving into 2023, where you're at with your career, you're speaking all over the place. You have a new book on the horizon. Who or what is inspiring you today? Who or what is your inspiration today?
I think what's emerging is our new way of having community with each other.
Community.
I'm looking at experimenting with that because we're not limited by time and space anymore. And what are we going to do about being a community? And so I'm interested to see how these new tribal patterns evolve when we're not limited by time and space.
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody, just savor that moment. Whitney says, John Baglino says, this was amazing. Whitney says, thank you, Don, for sharing your perspective. Such a fascinating conversation. So, all right, guys, we're going to part on this, and just, boy, please replay this. Don, if you came in late, you got to go back and catch the beginning. Go to Don's website. You want to catch, he has a bunch of videos on his website of previous speeches. He's been doing this for, talk about legacy. Don has built a legacy on helping folks with leadership. He's a humble, modest guy, but boy, he is absolutely, what a gift you are, Don. So, Don, thank you. I want to wish everybody an amazing, safe, incredible weekend. And just like Don was here today, Damon, what do we like to share? Be someone's inspiration. Just go out there, be someone's inspiration, make change your belief system, dude. That's like the mic drop there. Damon, take it away, man.
All right. Well, I just want to thank Don once again. And man, I just get excited every time that we can get on and just listen to you talk, man. Thanks so much. Appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Everyone that's listening today, hey, tell your friends, have them go back, listen to this from the beginning, get on Don's website. I'm going to make sure it's in the comments too. I think I got to get in the comments. Buy the books and look for that new book coming out in a couple months here from Don. Man, Kurt,
you heard it here first, right? We got like sneak preview from Don
we
on
did.
his book. So guys, you heard it here first. Be following Don when his book comes out. You want to be in line, be the first one to get that book. So
yep.
Thank you guys. Thank you. Don,
thanks everyone. We'll be back again next week. Hang out, Don. We'll be